One Piece's Extra Booster 1 has been one of the best sets released so far, providing supports for older unloved decks, and providing some new leaders to shake up each strategy. The best of these new leaders is Kouzuki Oden. For the Land of Wano block, this leader ensures every Land of Wano card is a counter, and then he hits for 7k and has a base of 6k on the opponent's turn, continuing the gimmick of Land of Wano leaders, making the below average card pool decent enough. I've gone and played over 100 games with this leader, and I've concluded what is actually the best build and how to handle each matchup. Let's start by explaining what this deck is and how it works. Then we'll get into specific ratios and potential techs. Oden as a deck is very aggressive, seeking to abuse leader skill to consistently rip cards out of the opponent's hand and life while not being punished due to having insane counter. My build doubles down on always having counter and focusing on that early board control. This deck has some absurd matchups, both positively and negatively. The deck has a very favorable matchup into red-purple Trafalgar Law and green-yellow Yamato, winning about 60% of the time. The deck loses 65% of the time against Enel, and very unfortunately, to OP7 Rob Lucci. This deck performed positively against Gecko Moria, Black Luffy, and even Sakazuki, being about a 55 to 60% win rate respectively. Really, this deck is dependent on how effective an opponent's removal is. Except for Sakazuki, I don't know why that one keeps working. Think of it like Trafalgar Law, losing out on so many resources, needing to have to use one Dawn to hit, and 2 cards to remove your board. While something like Rob Lucci removes your units for practically free. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough data about Katakuri and Bonnie to draw matchups from. For some reason, people just don't enjoy these decks on the sim. But from what limited testing I could do on the sim, and more importantly IRL, they seem like positive matchups. Overall, my win rate was about 65%, which is expected given the testing casual nature of the sim. Ranked was tested for a few of the games, but don't consider this ranked data. Half of the games were tested in EB01, and half were tested in OP7. Win rate did not change, but consistently moved up in OP7, the only change was Mihawk's replaced for the new Otama. My build is relatively consistent, having strong hands 70% of the time, weak hands 22% of the time, and complete bricks about 8% of the time. Surprisingly, this hand strength doesn't knock this deck out of winning. All a strong hand means is that by 4 or 5 Dawn, you see at least one Hiyori and one 5-drop. This does account for searches. Weak hands don't see Hiyori, bricks are defined as games without a 5-drop, or all top end or all events. Now, as you can see, without Hiyori, the win rate drops 30%. It goes from being a tier 1 deck to absolute gimmicky garbage. Of course, without a 5-drop, you don't win games, since you don't have a middle game or leader skill at all. There are different builds that can change these numbers, however you basically trade good matchups in the black decks for a slightly more consistent time all around. I optimized this deck to win local level tournaments, where 4 to 6 rounds would usually be the standard, with the whole variety of this game's decks expected. Now let's get into the breakdown of my build. There's 3 main parts to this list: 5 cost, top end finishers, and defensive options. You also note that literally every card in this list outside of 5 provides defensive value. This is because the best way to drive an aggro strategy is to make sure our opponent can't punish us for it. Kouzuki Oden's skill requires us to have a 5 cost or higher Land of Wano card to be live. Given the lackluster pool of 6 cost or higher Land of Wano characters in green and red, this leader ends up being based very heavily around 5 costs, especially with Kouzuki Hiyori letting us reduce them. Rerun 4 5 costs: Denjiro, red Yamato, Izo, and green Yamato. Denjiro is our most defensive option. Despite losing out on leader skill the turn we play him, Denjiro early on is one of our best plays that dramatically throws us ahead in advantage, especially against decks like Gecko Moria. If they can't deal with it during a turn, you will dramatically get ahead in advantage and pressure. It also combos with our more defensive options, red Yamato and Izo. Izo is a better defensive option to play, being a 7k that moves around to Dawn. While this build doesn't really need it, being able to get a permanent 2k counter is very strong, especially since it can burn the few bricks we don't always need. Red Yamato isn't as strong as Izo, not being a big attacker and being more easily removed, but it can sit on board constantly giving Dawn. It's game winning if left on board with Denjiro, but that of course is very hard to do. Really, the best use of red Yamato is as a 2k counter, or as a backup plan if you don't have another 5 cost. Green Yamato has the same problems as red Yamato, but it functions as one of the best counter options to yellow. Having both Banish and Double Strike, an opponent is required to deal with it, especially in a matchup like Katakuri and Enel. 3 things will happen if we drop Yamato. Either it hits and we deny them the first chunk of their game plan, or they guard and lose most of their hand, or lastly, they waste powerful removal early, freeing us up for late game. It's difficult to tell when exactly to go for Yamato, so I recommend testing games to get a feel for it. So to summarize the 5 cost, Denjiro for offense, Izo for defense, red Yamato for a backup, and green Yamato for situational pressure. This build is running 2 different win cons, 10-drop Doflamingo and 9-drop Zoro. Dofi is a generic option that comes up against every matchup. If you have an advantage and can freeze your opponent's board, it's an easy win. If you're behind, you can stall to try to pull something out of your butt. It's a green staple for a reason. 9-drop Zoro, however, is a bit more odd. It lets us sneak in wins in niche situations, and more importantly, it can win against Enel if we can bait out enough removal. Still, big risk. These 5 cards are your only non-counter cards, but they can still be trashed off Izo, so they're fine. Also, we run 4 Ryuma, Ikaunos Gecko Moria, red-purple Trafalgar Law, and a lot of rogue options. We also run quite a few 2Ks, 15 to be exact. Most of these exist just for use as a searchable counter. I am running 3 Radical Beam and 3 Paradise Waterfall. Waterfall is a niche surprise factor tech that works extremely often. You throw out green Yamato, whiff a swing, leaving 1 on up, and then when your opponent starts poking at it, you magically restand it, ruining their turn. It's perfect at 2 to 3, and I fully recommend running it, even if it can be a bit janky sometimes. Radical Beam is surprisingly a much more mixed bag. On one hand, it's a lot of counter for only 1 card, and it wins quite a few games. You honestly could equate 5-ish% of the wins on my data to this card being dumb. But it's also extremely clunky with this deck's Dawn management, and bricky as well. I can say that more than one of my brick and weak hands were caused by this card showing up in multiples. Really, that consistency is a problem. Honestly though, this deck really bums me out design-wise. Limiting the consistency around Kouzuki Hiyori is really sad. Also deciding to make it a green-red leader instead of a green-yellow leader, where all the support already was, is odd and disappointing. Kouzuki Momonosuke would be one of the coolest cards to play in this deck, along with Hiyori, along with Kiku Nojo, and the other trigger units. They'd actually reward this deck's aggressive playstyle. As it is right now, you're going to struggle quite a bit trying to figure out something to do with this deck. That's where these tech options come into play. The first and most popular tech option is to run the Akazawa 9 package. 4 Okiku, 4 OP1 Kinemon, and 2 8-drop Oden. The main upside to this engine is it provides an extra win con, boosting consistency. Oden is an okay finisher, and each of these cards can be a counter due to leader skill. So unlike decks like Kinemon and Green Kouzuki Oden, these aren't entirely bricks. This is peak fun, and it gives me a reason to use my alt arts. But unfortunately, it's still not great. Okiku is a bad card in every deck except Kinemon, since it's so vulnerable to removal, and the effect can just be ramped over by some purple matchups. Kinemon is also a problem, since he's only really good if you can play him with Okiku. Unfortunately, there are no good other Akazawa 9 units in green. Once again, we should have had green-yellow Oden, but basically, it leaves the engine feeling really inconsistent. Oden is fine. I think he's too expensive for 8 Dawn, and he does require Okiku in deck for maximum value. I find that Zoro is just better against most matchups, where a multi-attack finisher is necessary. And I can't forget to mention, also this build struggles in the black, harder than my build already does. I do vibe with this build, but know what you're getting into. But I suppose if you're watching this video, you already know exactly what you're getting into. You Can Be My Samurai is one of my favorite combos. You Can Be My Samurai says that if you rest 2 of your characters, draw 2 cards. Otama 1-drop and Kouzuki Hiyori make this free and searchable. It's a popular tech in Yamato and Perona decks. But in those decks, taking time to set up is actually rewarding. We need to establish a board as fast as we can, and this messes with our Dawn management, especially going second. If you want to make this work, I recommend running 1-drop Nami to make it more consistent. It's a bit more aggro to make up for what you'd lose playing You Can Be My Samurai, and it is a rest target if you need to. Overall, while I do like this tech can be hard to make work. If you want a spicier, but somehow more janky top end, you can run red options. 9-drop Whitebeard is actually solid. Setting yourself to 8 base and 9 swing is really good tempo. It just doesn't solve any issues with the deck and bricks a lot. You could trade some Radical Beams for this. Monkey D. Dragon is solid as well. He's got some synergy with your leader. He also has the same problems as Whitebeard, but he's a lot more tempo. I like him over Whitebeard in my style of build. It is player preference though. None of the Shanks or Luffys are good in this deck, but they are pretty funny. Of course, Kid and Killer is really good. If you want a more aggressive version of Ryuma, you can swap them. It's less maneuverable in board control and guard, but it's infinitely more useful in pressuring for game. Use your judgment and figure out what you like. Or, you know what, let me put it like this. I chose Ryuma because he does really well into black decks. So, that's my breakdown of Red-Green Kouzuki Oden. If you find anything spicy to do with this deck, let me know in the comments, or drop me a deck list in my Discord. I always love being able to learn things from my audience and other players. It's partly how I got my Kinemon deck list so good, by optimizing as much creativity as possible. If you like One Piece content, please do subscribe. I cover it quite a bit on my channel, and yes, all my videos are this in depth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.